Hello and happy International Women and Girls in Science Day. My name is Ariel Daniel. I'm a senior educator here at Lowell Observatory, and today we recognize the importance of women and girls in STEM fields. And today's purpose is to promote full and equal access to participation in science for women and girls. When I was younger, it was life-changing to see people who look like me in the fields that I wanted to be in, and we have some amazing women in science to look up to here at Lowell Observatory. Today we'll be having researchers and academics here at Lowell share their stories and experiences from their initial dreams to their education and varied career paths to how they apply science in their current roles today. I'd also like to remind the audience that your questions are welcome and you're free to put them in the chat and we'll try to get to them. Now, if y'all don't mind, I'd like to start off with some quick introductions from our women in science, Dr. Jennifer Hanley, Dr. Catherine Nugent, and Dr. Danielle Adams. So whoever would like to. Dr. Jennifer Hanley, would you like to start?
So I'm Dr. Jennifer Hanley. I'm a planetary scientist at Lowell. I study the processes that shape the surfaces of other planets. So thinking about maybe water on Mars or the lakes and seas on Titan, Saturn's largest moon, all the way to the subsurface ocean of Europa, one of Jupiter's moons.
Have fun. Dr. Catherine Nugent.
Sure. Hi, I am Catherine, and I am a research associate at Lowell Observatory. I am currently in the postdoc stage of my path. So I just finished my PhD around a year ago, and I am now working on research before I eventually decide whether I want to become kind of a professor or a more long-term researcher. And I study massive stars, so stars that are 8 to hundreds of times more massive than our sun, and how they are born and live, and then when they die, they explode as supernova and kind of create all of these heavy elements that we see. So I study all of those processes.
Wow, Dr. Danielle Adams.
Hi, I'm Danielle, and I am the Chief Marketing and Revenue Officer here at Lowell Observatory. But my research is in cultural astronomy. So I study indigenous Arabian astronomy, looking at how they viewed the night sky from before Islam into the end of the 1st century CE, essentially. And also how some of those star names survive today in the stars we know in our skies. So.
Yeah, a lot of stars are of Arabic descent. My tongue gets all tied when I'm trying to give constellation names.
Zubin el-Janubi.
It's like I feel like I'm sneezing. Great. Okay. So Jennifer Hanley, you started working at Lowell after you completed your postdoc research at SWRI, the Southwest Research Institute. Can you tell us about how you narrowed down what you wanted to research through your education?
Sure. So I was always interested in space and planetary science. When I was little, I wanted to be an astronaut, which I feel like is what a lot of people in this field say. And for instance, in high school, I really loved the book Red Mars. And one day I dreamt of stepping foot there. And I applied to a few different universities, all with good astronomy programs. And I eventually chose to attend Cornell University, in part due to their long history, Carl Sagan, for instance. But at the time, Steve Squires was there, and he was leading the Mars rovers that landed just my freshman year. And the opportunity I had to do research actually when I was there was to look at metallicity of K-type giant stars, which I knew nothing about. And I found that it wasn't really my thing, actually. And so that's one really good thing about doing research is sometimes you learn what you don't want to do. And so I ended up actually switching majors from astronomy purely to something called Science of Earth Systems, which allowed me to look at Earth as a planet. which really set me up for my PhD in space and planetary sciences. And so I got an opportunity to do an RU, a research experience for undergraduates, a summer internship doing lab work to look at, well, the stability of water on Mars. And I really liked that. I liked working with my hands more than looking at a bunch of squiggly lines on a computer screen, which is a lot of what I do now anyway. Somehow it's all come full circle. But at the time, I really liked working with my hands, and I still do that in part as well.
Cool. So planetary science, how did you choose the job at Lowell Observatory as a planetary scientist and astronomer? And like, were there other options you considered at the time?
Yeah, so as my funding was, I was typically the way that planetary scientists and a lot of astronomers are funded, if they don't work at a university, is through grants from, for instance, NASA or the NSF. And especially a lot of postdocs tend to be funded on a very specific project. And so when that grant money is running out, then you start looking for your next position. And so I had a couple choices whether to stay at that institution and continue working with some of my colleagues and collaborators on what we call soft money, which is, again, trying to get these grants from NASA or other institutions. But this opportunity to come to Lowell was available. And this was a fellowship opportunity with 5 years of funding, which is just amazing and really can only be done at a place like Lowell, where they have donors and people who just really care a lot about science. And so to have this opportunity to actually have solid funding for 5 years at that stage in your career was very enticing. And of course, I also loved the work that was being done. It actually allowed me to transition from just Mars to outer solar system stuff. So that's when I started doing some of the lab work related to Titan and Pluto. And so it was an opportunity to expand my research portfolio as well.
Nice. When did you start working at Lowell?
Yeah, I started in 2015.
Cool.
So it's been a few years now.
We like you.
I like to hear it.
Were there any challenges that you faced between completing your education and securing a position in your field?
So, I think the trick to that question is, do you mean a position or a permanent position? And that is probably where I would have to say some of my challenges is in the field of academia, there's not as many permanent positions as there are students coming up the pipeline or even postdocs. And so that is a significant challenge to anybody looking to join the field. And that, of course, can get compounded with other effects or influences outside of your control or outside of your research. So that's the big challenge that I've really faced is, worrying about funding and how I'm going to pay for my research and pay my salary. And I've been very fortunate to, get funding from NASA over time and, eventually start as a tenure track astronomer here. And that was kind of the biggest one.
Yeah, the financial issues. Would you say that you faced similar challenges while getting your education, or did those differ, or did you face any challenges while pursuing your education?
Yeah. So, getting into a PhD program, all these steps, there's always never enough spots for as many people as want them or as are worthy even. And so I think it's really important that we give everyone an equal opportunity and take into account everyone's life experiences and think about how, having people from different backgrounds and have different mindsets really contributes to science, and we get, you know, a very valuable perspective that we might have been missing out on. And so I think most recently my biggest challenge has been becoming a mother, and, you know, having to be pulled in so many different directions. I'm really fortunate to have an incredibly supportive family and work environment that allows me to shift priorities as needed.
You're like a superhero.
Not quite.
You got your undergrad at Cornell, and where'd you get your PhD?
The University of Arkansas.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so they have one of the few lab-based chambers for Mars research. That's where I did that internship as an undergraduate, and I just really love the idea of continuing to work with my hands, like literally getting my hands dirty. I work with like Martian regolith simulant, and so dirt, where I'm just working with dirt. And sometimes I put salt or water in it, but mostly it's dirt. And so
mud. Yeah, no, I'm the same way. I like seeing the things and touching them. It's like, then they're real. Now, looking back to when you were younger, could you have imagined that you'd be where you are today?
So I'm not sure that I would have imagined that I'd be here at Lowell, where to be able to be at this famous observatory where Percival, like looking through the same telescope that Percival Lowell looked through to map the canals on Mars. That's pretty incredible, right? I walk out of my office in the evening, especially in the winter when, you know, it gets dark so much earlier, and I can just kind of wander over to the Clark telescope and be like, wow, I'm looking through the same telescope that this person made famous for life on Mars.
Yeah.
And you know, I think I always did believe I'd be a planetary scientist one day, or something related to space. I just never allowed myself to think that wouldn't happen. I'm very fortunate that it worked out that way, and I acknowledge my, you know, incredible privilege that it did work out that way. But I still, you know, I love being at Lowell in such a really cool observatory.
I like it too. Well, cool. Well, thank you. And then again, like any of the ladies we got here, if y'all have something that you really want to throw in, we can have a conversation about it. But for now, I will jump on over to Dr. Catherine Nugent. Now, you began your education in computer science and astronomy, and then you got your master's in computer science, right?
Yep.
What got you interested in computer science initially? And then what was your like first goal originally when you were getting your education?
Sure. So I always wanted to be an astronomer. Similar to Jennifer, when I was a kid, I wanted to be an astronomer. I didn't want to be an astronaut. That seemed scary to me, but I liked the idea of being an astronomer. And so I did my undergrad degree at Wellesley College out near Boston in Massachusetts, and originally went wanting to major in astrophysics. And I had just a rough couple of years to start out with, and didn't end up liking any of the physics classes. So I got into computer science because I loved the department. The professors were incredibly supportive. What I was doing, the classes were very interesting. The community of students was very supportive. I loved the group. And so in some ways, I just felt really supported as a person in the computer science department. And that helped kind of shape what I decided to do next. But at the same time, I still loved the astronomy aspect. I loved observational astronomy. I loved looking through telescopes. I just wasn't really into the physics and the math. And so I kind of spent a lot of undergrad trying to figure out how to reconcile that and do both of those things at the same time, and how to kind of make my life through astronomy without having to do all of the physics. And I was eventually successful. But it definitely kind of was different route. But yeah, so my original kind of goal was astronomy, and then computer science just ended up being something that I found along the way that I also enjoyed.
Nice. Yeah, mine was the kind of flipped around. I love the physics and the astronomy. I didn't like the computer science. I just coding just never clicked for me. Like MATLAB, sure. Ira, like, talk about computer science and coding. How was the transition from your computer science degree and computer science background to astronomy?
Yeah, so it was the transition helped. So I started at Lowell. Actually, my first trip out to Lowell was back in, I think, 2008, when I was an undergrad at Wellesley. There was a program where you could come for the month of January and work with an astronomer for a month. And I did that. I worked with Dr. Henry Rowe, who is not at Lowell anymore, but it was great. And then I came out as similar to the program that Jennifer was talking about, an REU student, so research experience for undergrad. And I worked with Dr. Phil Massey for a summer. And because that summer went pretty well, we worked well together. I continued working with him and doing research on massive stars all throughout the time that I did the computer science stuff. So all throughout my undergrad in computer science, my master's, and then kind of when I later worked in the field of computer science, I continued the astronomy research. And so it was easier to then transition back into astronomy because I had been doing research throughout kind of the period that I took a break from kind of strict academia. And so certainly having that experience and being able to continue that was very helpful.
Nice. So the computer science background really gave you like an edge, like a better understanding.
Yeah, definitely. It certainly helps just approaching problems, not, feeling comfortable doing anything with programming or, writing my own code. It's been helpful having the computer science background.
Nice. Yeah, I see a lot of computer science and coding is necessary for astronomers. So what, if any, were the biggest challenges that you faced or continue to face in your educational pursuits and now in your career?
Yeah, I think one of the bigger ones that I faced is just I do have a non-traditional background. I didn't take physics in undergrad and I wanted to do astronomy. And I then had quite a few years after undergrad. I basically had 6 years between when I finished undergrad to when I went back to start a PhD program. And certainly it has been difficult finding institutions that are as supportive for perhaps older students or just kind of students that did a different path. And this is something that I've kind of continued to face as I now am doing postdocs and kind of continuing to look for positions. I think something that, Jennifer certainly talked about, there are very few jobs. And so one of those things means that you basically just have to move to where the job is. And so any sort of like, I really like where I'm living, I want to stay there. It's very, I'm in Boulder. I love Boulder, but there's CU Boulder as an institution. And there's one place that I could maybe try and get a tenure track job. And so it's just hard kind of having that aspect and taking that into account when realizing that in many cases, you have to be excited that you get a position and you need to move there to where that position is. And doing that, certainly being a little bit older and, having a house full of stuff and having to move every couple of years, it definitely is a very different lifestyle that comes with all of these amazing benefits. And, I love the research, I love looking through telescopes, but it's a lot more kind of upheaval than I guess as a child wanting to be an astronomer, I kind of realized would be part of the process. And so that's something that I think a lot of people face in academia.
Yeah. Yeah, I get that. Now you, looking back to when you were younger, could you imagine, did you think you were going to be where you are today?
Yes and no. I had decided I wanted to be an astronomer. I think I was in 5th or 6th grade. And so I think that I had that goal. I don't think I ever would have imagined the path that I took. I mean, certainly the computer science aspect, that was very unknown. I mean, I didn't realize that when I went off to college. And I really appreciate all of that kind of extra experience that I've had and just that different path. And I think I knew that I wanted to be an astronomer, but I didn't think I would get here in the way that I did.
Yeah. You said there was a 6-year, was it a 6-year gap between your undergrad and PhD? Were you researching or doing research or getting stuff to put on your resume in that time? Or were you doing anything or?
Yeah, so I worked with Phil Massey for that whole time.
Okay.
I did a lot more school than anyone should do, or I would recommend. I did a master's in computer science and then worked doing cybersecurity. And then I did another master's in physics so that I could get into a PhD program, where I then had to do another master's as part of the PhD program. So I wouldn't recommend that path. That was a lot more than I really had bargained for. But I was able to luckily continue to work doing astronomy research again. As Jennifer said, the soft money. And so Phil had grants through NASA and NSF and other funding agencies. And so I was able to work on as that soft money. So none of it was a permanent position. In some cases, it was a side job. But that was what really allowed me to continue publishing papers, observing, doing all of that research.
I had another one I wanted to ask you. I'll think about it later. I'll ask all y'all some more questions in a little bit. Well, thank you, Catherine. Dr. Danielle Adams, your first master's was in cultural anthropology. How did you get from there to astronomy?
Yeah, I feel like this is going to be a little bit the same story. I was going to go this way and then I went that way. Perhaps mine is a bit more extreme. I got my first telescope when I was 7 years old, and my grandmother gave it to me. And from that point, I was this avid amateur astronomer, making my own observations and keeping a logbook. But just before my senior year in high school, I did a summer internship, and the closest I could get to astronomy was superconductivity. But a few floors up was the astronomy department. This was at Rutgers. I'm from New Jersey. And so one day I went up and talked to some real astronomers, and they told me that they only got to do observations maybe 3 or 4 days a year, and the rest was computer analysis. And that just wasn't going to work for me. I had this connection with this guy, and I didn't want to only do that 4 days in a year. And so I actually completely diverted. I did my undergrad in theology. I did my first master's also at University of Arkansas. So I have that connection with Jennifer. That was in cultural anthropology, and that's when I started studying Arabic. So then I did almost a second master's. Like Catherine, I've had way too much schooling. And this was in Beirut, Lebanon, in Arabic literature. And while I was in Beirut, that actually got cut short due to Israel invading Lebanon. But while I was there, I discovered cultural astronomy. And this was this huge epiphany because, you know, this crazy winding path I had in my life, cultural astronomy just mashed everything together. It's the study of how people relate to the celestial objects and their appearance in the sky. So instead of studying the stars themselves, I look at how the people look at the stars. And so, you know, this combined astronomy and anthropology and even religion and just smashed it all together. And so that was an awesome thing for me. And then I, you know, applied for PhD programs. And that really was where I encountered a lot of challenge because for the anthropologists, I'm this weird person who does astronomy. And to the astronomers, I'm this weird person who brings in the culture and looks at the people instead of looking up at the stars. And so it's all like, you know, in the words of Doctor Who, humany woomany, and, you know, just really squishy. And so, you know, I end up just kind of bridging the gap between, you know, social science and astronomy, and you just have to forge your own way.
Wow, yeah, that's, man, yeah, it's interesting because like going through college or like starting college, I was a first gen college student, didn't know how any of this stuff worked. And it's so cool that even if you might know how this stuff's supposed to work, you still just like people, we're just winging it. Everyone's winging it. So you, how do you balance your interest in science and astronomy with your experience in marketing, and how do you apply that to your position at Lowell? Because you're in our marketing as well.
Yeah, I live in a lot of like liminal spaces between two areas, and that's another part. So I'm between social science and astronomy, and then I'm also between the professional and the academic. And while I was working on my PhD, I fell into marketing, and I came to see marketing as applied anthropology because you've got to learn about people and
understanding humans,
see what's important to them and, you know, talk to them. And so, you know, there was that connection. And then, you know, I worked, I do not recommend this. I worked full time to get myself through the PhD. And so that kind of stretched out my PhD program. But when I finished, then I was like, whoa, okay, I've got marketing and I've got astronomy and I want to do them both. You know, I don't want to like drop one. And when I graduated in May, I thought, you know, the best thing would be to just go to like a planetarium or, you know, observatory of some kind and do marketing and my research still. And, you know, I looked around at that time and, you know, there's nothing like that available. And then I submitted my PhD dissertation in the summer. And then a month later, I get contacted by someone on LinkedIn, a recruiter looking to fill this role at Lowell Observatory. And they wanted someone who could lead our marketing, but knew the language of astronomy. And so, wow, okay, there it is. And so, yeah, you know, it's, because I'm focused on our marketing, I don't get to spend as much time on the research side, but I still progress through it. It just takes me longer to get through.
Right. What, if any, were the biggest challenges that you faced or continue to face, again, during your getting your education and in your career now? The whole liminal space.
Yeah, I mean that really is like, when I was applying to PhD programs, you can't get a degree in cultural astronomy here in the US. There's one program in the UK, but that didn't exist when I started my PhD. And so, I mean, I remember, I would write letters of interest to different anthropology departments and talk about cultural astronomy, and they'd reply and say, well, that sounds really cool, but it's not anthropology. And I'm like, wait, what? I'm studying people's traditions and beliefs. Like, this is definitely anthropology. It's just has this weird astronomy part in it. And so I think, I always have to explain myself. If I meet someone and say, oh, I'm a cultural astronomer, they're like, I don't understand that. I understand culture.
Brain hurty.
I understand astronomer. I don't understand the combination. And so, I am always explaining myself, but, I'm fine. It's a little bit of a trailblazer kind of role. Although, there's quite a number of cultural astronomers now looking at different cultures and people groups. So it's becoming more known. But, even within the American Astronomical Society, I'm in the History of Astronomy division, which gets me there mostly. Although most people in that division are focused on, more recent past, few hundred years of history of scientific mathematical astronomy versus, farmers out in the fields using stars to time the next rain.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah. Now, you as well, did you, as a young adult, did you think you would be doing what you're doing now? Did you think you'd be where you are today?
I would say halfway.
Yeah.
So, I was going to be an astronomer, and gosh, I think somewhere's around fourth grade, I looked in some college book and found, Caltech was #1 in astronomy. I didn't know U of A existed at that point. And so I actually plotted out like a 2-month trip to drive from New Jersey to California and see all the sites because I was going to Caltech. And so like I knew, I was always aimed at astronomy, but this whole cultural part was a surprise.
Yeah.
And, I love it. It's a wonderful surprise. But yeah, when I was young, I had no idea I would be, fluent in Arabic and, traveling in the Middle East on my journey to be an astronomer.
Yeah. How fun. Yeah, I think it's such a cool thing to think about how like your brain can pay for you to go places. Like I was actually going to kind of open up the floor now. I have some questions I want to ask you, all of y'all as a group. We also have some audience questions. Jennifer and Catherine, you both said that you were in REU programs. I was also in an REU program. I'd like to get your opinions on how the REU changed, like any thoughts that you had about your major or the research that you had done before, or if the REU was your first research experience, because my REU was, and it was a wild ride. But so what are your feelings on REU programs?
I think they're fantastic in general. And I think it's such a great opportunity to get undergraduate students who might not have exposure to research to get that. In fact, throughout my time as a graduate student and now here at Lowell, I work with RU students every summer. I think it's just so much fun to work with such motivated students. You get, full-time work for 10 weeks. And, the students get their housing paid and a stipend in addition to that. And so it's such a great opportunity. It really solidified for me that I wanted to do planetary science more than classical astronomy, because I did have that opportunity to work with Mars laboratory research. And so if I didn't do that experience, I probably would have gone into grad school a little less sure of what I wanted to do.
Yeah.
And so it was a great experience for me.
Did you do research at your college before you did an REU?
I did, yeah. And so I had done this, classical astronomy stuff where I was looking at
and then the REU is different.
Yeah.
The planetary.
So again, it was an opportunity to see a different type of research. I know a lot of people in my program in my year, so it was all planetary science people. Only a few of us went into planetary science in the end, actually, but everyone was successful in what they did, right? And so even just having some sort of research experience, whether you want to pursue that specific avenue, it's always helpful to narrow down your interests.
Yeah, I think REUs are also aimed towards students from possibly smaller colleges or colleges that don't give a lot of undergraduate research experience. I think they're just the neatest thing. What about you, Catherine?
Yeah, definitely. My REU advisor is watching right now, so I can't say anything too bad about the experience. But no, we still work together. So clearly it was a good experience. When I was at Wellesley, I had done some research the previous year, and I actually was working on asteroids. And so I was convinced that I wanted to do planetary science and be an asteroid astronomer or asteroid planetary scientist, I guess, for, could do that for a PhD. And doing an REU, I worked on stars, on massive stars, and it was the first time that I had ever worked with spectra. So I was working with a different type of data. I was working with data from HST, a space telescope, as opposed to something, of the small telescope that we had at our college. Yeah. So it was a very completely different experience. I mean, I did my REU at Lowell. And so just being at Lowell, surrounded by all of the history, we went to Kitt Peak and observed while I was an REU student. And so it was a wonderful experience that clearly very drastically changed what I did for my science. I basically switched from doing asteroids to stars at that point. Also I had really gone into the computer science route. The previous 2 summers I had done computer science internships, and this was kind of my last hurrah at wanting to do astronomy research, and I really enjoyed it. And so it definitely changed kind of what I continued to do afterwards. So I agree, REUs are wonderful and such a great experience for undergraduates.
Yeah, I think it's neat to, you're really diving head first. It's nothing but this research. I mean, it's because there's a group of people in your cohort as well, which so much fun to just be around a bunch of nerds that love the same stuff you love, and they bounce, when they start talking about neutron stars or whatever. The coolest thing. I think they're just so neat. So we had a question from the audience that any of y'all are welcome to answer. It is there a place in astronomy for someone who's not highly proficient in math?
Cultural astronomy is, one possible route. I mean, depending what you do, there are calculations you can make about where stars appear, but there are also really much more accurate planetarium simulation software available nowadays too. So kind of depends how far back you go. If you're going back, into the Neolithic, some of those programs get a bit less accurate. But yeah, that's an option.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I've managed to do astronomy almost without physics, which means that I do some math, but again, like I took 2 upper division math classes in undergrad and that's it. So I think that having an appreciation and I think knowing kind of what your limits are, what you enjoy, what you don't enjoy as an observational astronomer, I do some pretty basic calculations, but I think the biggest hurdle that I luckily think has changed a lot just in the last 5 years is just kind of getting through the educational component. Once you kind of get past that and you're doing your own research, you really get to dictate what you do on a regular basis. And one thing that I've seen that has been wonderful is just, I think a lot of undergrad and PhD programs are being a lot more open with kind of how they accept, an astronomy program to go. There used to be the physics GRE was this big scary test that people had to take. And now a lot of departments for PhD programs in astronomy and astrophysics don't require it anymore. And I know that wasn't a test that I was going to be able to take and be successful at. And so I think that the field has changed a lot just in the last 5 years in terms of the requirements. And I think it's much easier to kind of create your own path using what you like best than it was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, I agree. I think that I don't use eigenvectors in my everyday, research or anything like that, but I do calculate the area under a curve. And so, there's different levels of math. And also I think that math can be scary. And especially, women and girls get told that they're not good at math. And I got comments like that, and that hurts. And it's not fair and it's not right. And, so on one hand, I want to say, do math anyway. But on the other hand, you really don't have to if you really, truly don't enjoy it. And, or if you just don't have an innate aptitude for it. And not because of your gender, but just because you might not, or something, your brain might not work that way. So,
yeah.
And I'll also say, I did not do well on the physics GRE either. That was a terrible exam.
Yeah.
I'm so glad they are not required anymore.
Yeah, I know I talked to some mentors about it, and they're like, when I was on like the grad acceptance board, like I didn't care about test scores. I'm just looking at your letters and your essays. Oh, I had a thing I was going to say. Oh, I actually had a question for Catherine again. You did research before Phil Massey, you did research with someone else?
At Lowell, with Henry Rowe.
Henry Rowe. Were their research like fields the same, like similar, both like massive star? No?
No, Henry Rowe. So the project that I did, and again, it was much shorter than an REU. It was just, I think, 3 or 4 weeks. And
right,
so it was very short. But at the time, it was on Titan. And so we were doing a Titan monitoring telescope, the mini TMT. And what my project was really cool. I was characterizing the camera to see kind of how well just it would work for the project he was using. So it was planetary science in a sense, because the goal was monitoring Titan, but it was also kind of electronics. I got to work in the clean room up at Lowell. And it was a fun project that I learned a lot about cameras and dark current and all of that kind of fun stuff.
Yeah. is that the little white telescope by the old Jiffy Pop Dome?
Yes.
I love that guy. People ask about him all the time, and all I knew is that it did something with Titan.
We're actually getting it working to actually monitor Titan finally.
Wow.
Yeah, so I helped with that back in January 2008.
Hey, the floor of the 21-inch roll-off dome is still broken, so it's okay.
But we're roboticizing it, so that'll be even better.
Are we fixing that one?
No, the Titan monitoring one is being roboticized.
If anyone's just coming in, Titan is a moon of Saturn. We're talking about a telescope that does a Saturn moon research. Now, Jennifer, you were saying earlier that people said, like, girls aren't good at math. Girls can't do this stuff. I wanted to ask all of you guys, what is it like to be a woman in a primarily male-dominated field?
I think you have to be very confident that your ideas are valuable. Imposter syndrome is really difficult to deal with, and I still experience it all the time. But thankfully, I'm surrounded by a lot of very good friends and family and coworkers who do support me and support my work and, help me realize my value. It can be really tough though, because sometimes people talk over you or take your idea and just say, hey, look at this.
And say it louder.
Everyone's like, this is great. I'm like, I said that before, but, I think having allies is really important, right? So having other people stick up for you too, so that you don't always have to be the squeaky wheel. That's always helpful. And I think that things are progressing, things are getting better. They're not all the way better yet, and we still have a lot of work to do. But I am encouraged by the amount of stuff that's being talked about in, justice, equity, diversity, and inclusion, and accessibility, and all those different types of axes that you can, think about how someone might need extra support or, just maybe has different experiences, and that's valuable too.
Yeah. Do you both have a similar thought process, mindset as well?
Yeah, I think one thing that has been just kind of building off of that, surrounding yourself with people that are supportive and also just are aware of all of the different issues that women and, anyone that is kind of an underrepresented minority face is really helpful. I went to the University of Washington for my PhD, and having that experience of being with a bunch of other grad students who kind of are all on the same page and we're trying to kind of work together, and having a very supportive department. The University of Washington astronomy department is very supportive about a lot of these issues. And so being in that environment and really feeling that support was incredibly helpful. And it makes it so much more stark when you then go into an environment where you don't have that support, or you give a colloquium or you're on a panel and you realize that you're the only woman there. And it's just suddenly this feeling of like, oh no, I'm out of my comfort zone. Yeah. And so definitely it is a different experience, but luckily I do think things are slowly getting better, and at least more people are aware of the fact that we really can't, treat everyone as if everyone had the same experience, because we haven't.
Mm-hmm. That is wild, just how vastly different everyone's journeys can be.
Well, I think for me, this question is a bit different because, you can get to cultural astronomy through astronomy or through social science. And, I went the social science route, and there's frankly a much higher percentage of women in social science compared to astronomy or physics. And so, I count myself really fortunate that I didn't run into issues so much because of my gender. It was more based on my topic, and that it was unconventional for the field. And so, it's just a little bit of a different path, I think.
Yeah. I would agree. For all three of you, again, what would you tell young women looking to get into STEM? How would you, like, if someone's like, I want to do this, I don't know what to do, I don't know if I can do it, how would you talk to a young woman who wants to get into STEM?
How about we turn it on you, Ariel? How did you start and get into STEM?
Leonard Nimoy and William Shatner.
Okay.
Yeah. Because I got super into like sci-fi when I was in like elementary, middle school, and my best friend and I actually did, like, she showed me Doctor Who and like the original Star Trek series, and I was like, that is the coolest thing ever. And then like we'd be like watching the shows, and I'd be like, wait, okay, hold on. So they're like on the Enterprise and they're walking. Like, what kind of like anti-gravitational device could they've made? And then like we'd accidentally write papers on Newton's laws for fun. And then she went to Arizona State University to study Earth and space exploration, and I went to Northern Arizona University to study physics and astrophysics. And honestly, going into the degree, I was kind of thinking that like I didn't know that there was going to be math. Like, I didn't know. And like, I wasn't terrible at it, but I wasn't awesome at it. It was like, I'll do it if I have to. Because I thought the astronomy degree was going to be like, we're going to talk about how cool black holes are and like exploding stars and like rockets. And I was like, yeah, I'm into that. And then like, it was like, no, we're going to talk about Euler's method for 4 years. But it was interesting when I got into like actual astronomy classes, because like, took all this math, took all this physics. I couldn't take astronomy until I think my second year. So I was just stuck doing this stuff that I didn't even know if I really was into, like, and then my first astronomy class I took, everything clicked. Like, it all made sense. And I was like, wow, this is phenomenal. This is fantastic. Like, all of this math is used to describe all of these, phenomena that go on. And that's just like the neatest thing to me. Yeah. And then I did an REU where I worked on X-ray instrumentation. And I think that's really neat, because I think, Catherine, you were saying that you're too scared to be an astronaut. I wanted to be one, but my mom said I wasn't allowed because I'd be too far away from her. So,
something I'm hearing there, Ariel, in your story is, you got interested into these cool sci-fi TV shows and you could see yourself there. I think, going back to your question, I think, girls need to see themselves in a science role. And like, if you just look at Star Trek, and trace it back, and then to where we are now, the representation is completely different. And, superhero movies, whatever, various kinds of sci-fi, it's just, there's more representation now, and it's easier to picture yourself there if you're a girl.
Yeah. It's been interesting in the Lowell Observatory's public programs, because we have like we have like a pretty even amount of like men and women educators. I feel like for a hot second we actually had more female educators. And we'd have guests like pointed out like, oh, it's so cool, like you have like a girls night, like, oh, there's, I've only seen like the girls in the red shirts, and I'm like, huh, like, yeah, it is kind of cool. Like it's been really nice working at this institution because like I it is like, I think what uh Jennifer said earlier, like, and I think all of you said, just like it's like a community, and we're comfortable. At least I'm comfortable, and like it's so cool to see representation here, and like, dude, like giving little science demos to the kids, and like having a little girl come up and be like, I want to be just like you when I grow up. It's like, oh, yes.
Yeah, one of the first times I did meet an astronomer, which is a program that we used to do in the before times, where an astronomer would be out in the plaza and just talk to visitors. A family came up and they had two kids, a little boy and a girl. And apparently in the car ride up, the girl had asked if women were allowed to be astronomers. And so the fact that I was there, they were very appreciative that their daughter could see a female astronomer role model, and that was very touching. I guess the one thing I wanted to say to answer your question about advice on getting.
How would you inspire?
Yeah. Yeah. You can pick your own path, kind of like what Catherine said. There's a lot of different paths to become an astronomer or a planetary scientist. And especially in planetary science, the field is completely opened up to include almost all other types of science, right? There's astrobiology. So if you're interested in biology, you can do that. If you're interested in geology, you can do that. I mean, we have literally rovers on Mars right now that you could, understand the microscopic composition of the rocks on Mars. There's weather stations, there's helicopters that are flown on Mars and will eventually be flown on Titan. And so, there's a lot of different paths. And so if you're not great at one, or you're more interested in one than the other, there's a lot of ways to get there.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Just, it's like I'm already in this, but it's like still really cool to like hear everyone else's stories about how like there's no like set path, even though like, I don't know, I felt like I heard about one. You like get your undergrad, then you go to grad school, then you do your postdoc, then you blah, blah. But it's like, you don't gotta. It's like, it's like, sounds so cheesy, creating your own path, but it's like, do whatever you want.
I think I'm seeing that more and more. I think more of the grad students and postdocs that I interact with have had very different experiences. A lot of them have been teachers or served in the military or just done something completely different before coming back to get a PhD or do a postdoc. And
yeah,
I guess kind of going back to the question of, I don't know about how to inspire, but just kind of like ways to kind of be motivated. I think finding those people that are very supportive of you and, appreciate that you want to be a woman in science or just an astronomer or planetary science, and kind of keeping them close and having them be your cheerleaders is very helpful. I think that, just having those people throughout my life that have always been supportive of what I'm trying to do has been incredibly helpful. So that's my one recommendation.
Get buddies.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I think that meant, like doing my REU, it was like me and these 7 people, and it's like, oh, I'm really not feeling it today. Like went into the lab at 8 a.m. and I got out at 7 p.m. and they're like, I'll make you peanut butter oatmeal. It's like, thank you for supporting me. This was so much fun. There was one comment that I'd like to read to you guys. from Carla saying, ladies, you're all awesome. So many experiences and studies I did not expect in astronomy. What a wonderful legacy for the future, for your family, for families, and for all women just taking a peek into science. So this will just about mark the end of our stream tonight. I'd like to thank you wonderful ladies for taking time out of your evening to hang out with me. And I'd also like to thank our audience for listening and all of our members and donors for making digital programming like this possible. So thank you all again and have a wonderful night.
Thank you.